Hello, hello, hello. Happy Monday. Welcome to Resistance Live. It's Monday, January 8th, 2024. Hello and welcome. It's nice to see all of you. It is a very busy Monday morning on what is going to be a very busy week, you guys. I hope you're prepared because we're in for it this week. I mean, I know that we knew that this was going to happen at a certain point in early 2024, but we're really in it. All right. So I got a lot of things to talk about this morning, including extremely significant breaking news out of Georgia. But before we get started, I am ECM, also known as Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Tongva territory here in Southern California. I am wearing today a white button-down shirt. My hair is half pulled back. I have on my thick gold hoop earrings for our friends who are visually challenged. My skin is pink. My eyes are green. My hair is dirty blonde. I'm in my office in front of a plant and a lamp and a chair. And I'm really glad you all are here. I hope you had a good weekend. Okay, so I just want to warn you guys that we're going to get to everything that's coming up this week because seriously, the next 7 days are just madness. But I want to talk first about these unexpected filings that have happened this morning in Fulton County, Georgia. So you may have missed this because, again, as usual, this stuff broke like 25 minutes before we went on the air. But Trump has filed 3 new motions in Fulton County, Georgia today, out of nowhere. There is a pretrial motions deadline today in Fulton County. So in some sense, it's not all that surprising that we have seen today be the day that these things drop. However, the context of them is so desperate. My initial reaction when I was reading the papers was, wow, they have just opted to throw the entire kitchen sink at the wall and see what sticks. So there's 3 motions that cover 4 separate issues in Fulton County. And what's clearly behind the strategy of this is some sort of an attempt to overlap with what is happening in the DC circuit in the hope that Judge McAfee in Georgia will rule one way and the DC circuit or the Supreme Court will rule another. And there will be some kind of a conflict that initiates some form of delay. All right. But I want to make it really clear to everyone that this strategy in Georgia is particularly off the rails. Again, one of my struggles in all of this is that the papers, once again, are, I don't know, in that Shakespearean phrase, full of sound and fury signifying nothing. They're very loud in the way that they purport to assert certain doctrines of federal law in state court, which is also very bizarre, especially in the way in which they're invoking them. I'll get to that in a second. But the flip side of it is that they really don't have a leg to stand on any of these. And I'm not concerned about it from the standpoint of like, do I think he's going to win? But I do think, especially for those of us who are lawyers and those of us who are very politically attuned, the crazy making, I've said this before, and I just have to warn you all before I get into the substance of this. This is yet another example of it. The crazy making behavior by Trump and his lawyers as they get closer and closer to the point of accountability is really enough to make you dizzy. I had a moment when I was looking over these papers this morning where I was like, wow, like it's insane. It's the kind of lawyering that, gives you pause about not only who's giving the directions, because we all know that, but also about just how far down the rabbit hole the lawyers have to be to assert these kind of claims. All right. So they've made one claim in particular that just really took the breath out of me because it's so far out there, but we'll leave that one for last. All right. So the first issue that they've raised is the issue of due process. And they are claiming that we've seen this one before, by the way, because this is not the first time they've asserted this one, but they're claiming that they had no notice, that Trump had no notice that anything that he was doing in advance of January 6th or in relation to the fraudulent electors could have been illegal. That's the due process argument that we have seen asserted previously when this issue has come up in the DC District Court. And we know that he screamed about due process before. This has been included in certain briefs that have been filed. It was, filed in initial papers in the DC District Court. But I have to tell you that it's like completely laughable. When you read it in the papers, you're like, you're actually claiming that a conspiracy to overthrow an election, you didn't have adequate due process notice that conspiring to overthrow a federal election, including by creating fraudulent slates of electors and creating forged documents, was not a crime. That's the argument that they're making, that they didn't know, that he didn't know, that Trump didn't know that what he was doing was potentially a crime. And I have to say that given everything that we have heard from his former lawyers, from people inside the White House, from the statements that were given to the January 6th committee, like, you truly would have to be in outer space to believe that there was any kind of legitimacy to this argument. All right. We know that he was told over and over and over again. I mean, just think about Eric Hirschman, right? He was told over and over and over again that what they were doing was a crime, that people were going to end up in prison. Rudy Giuliani was told the same thing, that they knew that they had lost the election, that the efforts that they were undertaken were potentially a violation of federal law. There's really no argument to be made here to that effect. All right. Thank you for the reminder about the banner. By the way, before I take it off, let me just tell you all, we're 2 days now from your last chance to get in on Mobilize 2024. The link here is below. If you want to train to save democracy in 2024 where you live, you got to get in by Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific. So please join us. I think we're up to about 75 people in this class right now, and I would really love to have as many of you in there as possible. All right, so that's the link, GaiaLeadershipProject.com/mobilize. Please join us. It's going to be really, really good. Class starts Thursday. All right. The second argument that Trump makes in Fulton County is one that we have seen before, which relates to the argument of double jeopardy. And this is the argument that, again, is laughable and that we've heard many, many times now before, including in DC, including before the DC circuit now, which is that in essence, because he was not convicted on the second impeachment, he cannot be tried again or he cannot be tried, period, for criminal conduct related to it. Now, those of you who have been following the mainstream media over the weekend know that there's been a lot of discussion about this in the legal commentator glitterati about the fact that when the impeachment was underway, members of the Republican Party who voted against convicting him said, this is a matter for the criminal courts. Now they have flipped this and are claiming that because he was not convicted, the criminal courts shouldn't have jurisdiction over this. Again, crazy, right? No legitimacy to this argument. But that's the second motion that's been filed this morning in Fulton County. The third motion is the one where there is a new argument contained in it that just, literally felt like when I read it, I was like, oh, okay, that's bold. It does assert the same presidential immunity claims that are going to be litigated in front of the DC circuit tomorrow. That part is not new. And it is the same argument that, and again, you read some of these headers and you're like, oh my God, this is crazy, because there's literally a section in there that says allegedly convening a false slate of electors is within the duties of the president. You're just like, come on. You don't have to be a lawyer to understand how out in left field this is, okay? But the argument that really took my breath away was an argument under the supremacy clause. And the supremacy clause of the Constitution basically is the clause that says if federal law governs a particular area, state law can't intrude on it, all right? So this, by the way, is one of the reasons why Greg Abbott can't make his own laws in Texas about immigration. Because the supremacy clause says this has been claimed by the federal government and federal law. You do not have the authority to do this. All right. And it's also been used in, many other instances, EPA regulations, right? We have various other examples of this where the USDA, the regulation of the quality of your meat nationwide. Okay. These are areas that have been claimed by the federal government. And the states do not have the authority to intrude on those areas, all right? Yes, there are state EPAs. Yes, I know that. But if there's a federal regulation that says that these are the parts per million that you're allowed to have in water of this particular chemical, that is not an area that can then be waived by the states, right? So the argument that Trump is making here is that because quote unquote presidential immunity, he claims, is an area that has been claimed by federal law, the states do not have the ability to prosecute him under state law for crimes. Just to give you an example of how crazy this is, all right? In essence, this is an argument that if Trump went into the state of Georgia and murdered someone, shot someone in the head, that Georgia officials could not prosecute him for murder because presidential immunity is a doctrine of federal law. It's astonishingly desperate and off the rails. I mean, like I think even his own lawyers knew that because they literally only dedicated like 2 pages of the brief to this. But truly, I saw this argument and I was like, oh my God. And, you know, again, I got to remind everyone that, you know, extinction bursts are not just limited to the narcissist himself. I mean, I think the legal team is getting very desperate here because the walls are closing in and they are making arguments that no other lawyer would dare to make. Now, I have to remind you all, because I know there's going to be lots of people who are going to get up in arms about this and be like, why haven't the lawyers been sanctioned? Well, they might be. Why are the lawyers allowed to make all these arguments? Well, you can kind of make any argument that you want as long as you don't run afoul of the federal rules that require you to certify that everything that you're like saying in a pleading is legitimate. If you're not, then you're up for sanctions. And that, you know, you also could get a bar complaint. But I have to say that these kinds of arguments are really, really wild, like to the point that you're essentially making an argument that the Constitution doesn't say what it says, and also that it falls in line with all the arguments that are being currently made and will be made tomorrow in front of the DC Circuit. More on that in a minute. That it sort of say like Trump as a former president has the immunity of a king. You know, that if he goes out and commits any kind of a crime in any state, the states can't hold him accountable. It's wild. It's truly wild. So, you know, again, I'm going to say, I don't think any of this is going to fly in Georgia, but I think the big takeaway from this has to be that we have reached a real breaking point for Trump now, because if you were not desperate, if you thought that you had a legitimate defense, if you were not terrified of not having any defense, and you were not terrified of dying in prison, if you thought that you had any legitimate basis to contest these allegations, you wouldn't be making an argument like this. Like, you wouldn't be making an argument like this, because essentially what you're saying is like, states can't prosecute me for crimes, period. And I personally think that it's wild. I mean, I don't see any way that this is going to fly. I certainly don't think that Judge McAfee is going to entertain it. All right, so moving on to the big week that we have ahead. The argument in front of the DC Circuit on the issue of presidential immunity is tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. It will not be televised, but there is going to be a live YouTube audio stream available from the court. The court has this morning issued a series of rules, essentially, I guess is the way to put it, about how the hearing is going to be handled tomorrow. Why have they done this? Because about an hour ago, Trump announced on Truth Social that he's going to be in the courtroom for the DC Circuit appellate argument tomorrow. I don't know why he's doing this. Like, I'll be honest about it. There's no reason for him to be there. He's not required to be there. This is a purely legal argument by his lawyers. And if anything, I think his presence is actually going to detract from the arguments that his attorneys are going to make, because they're going to be more concerned about performing for him than they will be about making legitimate arguments in front of the DC Circuit. It may also mean that the DC Circuit is going to have to take certain steps to rein him in. If he erupts in the courtroom, if his body language or his verbal outbursts interrupt these proceedings, it's going to be very drastic for him, because this is an appellate court. This is not a trial court. I also, frankly, think that this may just be an opportunity, because he hasn't had a lot of camera time lately on mainstream media, to kind of get his narcissistic supply on all of this. And so you can expect that there will be wild press statements in advance and after. And he's apparently taken to Truth Social this morning and spewed all sorts of nonsense about how he's immune from everything. You know, we're going to see more of that from a media circus standpoint tomorrow. All right. But this argument is very significant. And I have to remind everybody, this is on a very fast track. We have literally gone from mid-December to tomorrow with all briefing and oral argument on this particular issue. I said it over on Threads on Friday. It's absolutely true. It's true with regard to the Supreme Court taking up the Colorado ballot initiative. I have literally never seen a briefing schedule this quick. And I litigated in front of the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. I mean, this is unheard of. So I'm going to say to all of you what I said yesterday to all of our Patreon subscribers. By the way, if you want to get in on Sunday Progressive Coffee Hour, please become a subscriber at patreon.com/resistancelive. We can hang out and chat every Sunday morning. But I want to just reiterate one thing here, okay? I would not be surprised to see a ruling on this by the end of the week from the DC Circuit. That is going to result in basically an immediate petition to the Supreme Court. Again, you will remember Jack Smith tried to leapfrog this and take it straight to the Supreme Court. The issue of presidential immunity, I honestly don't think he stands a snowball's chance in hell of winning this anywhere, including in front of the Supreme Court. And I am not alone in that. Folks like Andrew Weissman and Neil Katyal and Jill Wine-Banks agree with me on this. I do not think that the Supreme Court is going to grant him presidential immunity, because if it did, I'm going to remind you all, Joe Biden could throw Donald Trump in a gulag and stay in power forever, and there would be no means of prosecuting him. So this is a good for the goose, good for the gander kind of situation here. And I don't think the presidential immunity argument is going to fly. I'm also going to remind you all that the DC Circuit did something very interesting last week, which is that it advised the parties to this appeal argument to come prepared to talk about the issues that had been raised in the amicus briefs by conservative lawyers, that the absolute immunity claims of Donald Trump should be denied. The fact that we have people, including folks who were in Donald Trump's administration, arguing that he doesn't have presidential immunity for the crimes of January 6th is something that clearly the DC Circuit panel is taking very seriously. So I would expect that tomorrow we're going to hear a lot about that. There's going to be a lot of questions from the bench about it. I think we're going to see Trump's lawyers try to address it in some form or function. But, you know, I have to make it really clear here that any lawyer that I know who I respect feels very strongly that this presidential immunity argument has no chance in hell of succeeding either at this level or inside the Supreme Court. So I do want people to feel free to listen in. I'm going to be listening in even though it's 6:30 in the morning here, because I'm really invested and curious as to how this is going to go. It's also going to be a very brief oral argument, by the way. I think they've given 20 minutes to each side and 10 minutes for rebuttal. So the whole thing will be done in under an hour. What I do want people to understand is that the real question I think that we're going to get some view on here through oral argument is how seriously he's going to get shot down. And that will bear impact on what gets appealed to the Supreme Court and what the Supreme Court chooses to do with it. This is a scenario in which my view is that we could see the Supreme Court just completely deny review. If the DC Circuit writes an opinion that says there is no presidential immunity, this is obvious, right? You cannot have presidential immunity for conspiring to overthrow an election. You cannot have presidential immunity for organizing a fraudulent slate of electors. You cannot have presidential immunity for making an effort to overturn votes in other states. I mean, this is basic stuff, right? If that's the way that opinion gets written, as I'm like virtually certain it will be, I'm not sure the Supreme Court has anything additional to contribute on it. I'll be really honest. It might be a real waste of the Supreme Court's time to even hear it. And if they decide that's the case, then, we're in a situation where that opinion is going to stand and he goes to trial and Shutkin's court date is going to stick. March 4th, my friends, the day before Super Tuesday. So we're going to learn a lot more about that in the coming day. All right. So just stay tuned for that. All right. Okay. I'm just going to address this very quickly. There is no chance in hell that Joe Biden is going to pardon Donald Trump. None. I would bet my bottom dollar on it. Joe Biden is never going to pardon Donald Trump. All right. So don't even entertain that scenario. All right. The other thing that's coming up this week, by the way, is the closing arguments in the New York civil fraud trial against Donald Trump. That's Thursday. All right. And you may recall that at the end of last week, we learned that Letitia James had asked for $370 million in fines. That's up from an initial $240 million in fines. That's how badly that trial has gone for Donald Trump. And he has already been found liable for fraud. The outstanding claims in that case were about insurance fraud and fraudulent documents claims. But, he's toast in New York State. So expect that we are going to have a ruling out of the New York civil fraud case. It could be as soon as Friday. I'm just going to be honest with you, because we've had a nice long break here. And if Engoron has, it's a bench trial. Remember, there's not a jury in this case. If Engoron has already essentially made up his mind, which he could, like the evidence is closed. The oral argument is really just an opportunity for both sides to sum up the argument in the trial. That he may already have a judgment in draft. And so we could see a ruling in that case, again, very quickly, Friday, Monday, Tuesday of next week. All right. So a lot happening there in very short order. And I want everybody to be really clear on this. Any one of these events going against Trump is going to cause a really serious abreaction from him. Please do not allow yourselves to get outraged or shocked or disgusted or afraid as a result of what he does in relation to this. There's not going to be any scenario here in which Donald Trump does not completely lose his mind if he loses in front of the DC Circuit, or for that matter, if the request that was made by Letitia James that he's never allowed to engage in real estate in New York State again, and there's a $370 million judgment against him, which could result in the seizure of what he owns in Trump Tower, any property that he owns in New York. There could be asset forfeiture provisions undertaken to seize assets elsewhere. I mean, it's going to go very badly for him if that's how this ruling goes, as we all expect it to. And so, I'm just going to tell you, I don't think that there's going to be any likelihood here that he's going to win in New York State. I mean, again, he's already been found liable for fraud. This was really just a trial to determine damages. So don't be surprised when he loses his mind. Okay. I'm just going to say that don't get outraged. Don't allow yourselves to be distracted from all the work that we have to do on the election. More on that in a minute, because it's going to be a crazy window of time. And as I said last week, and I'm going to say here again today, and again, I already know this is going to be one of my big mantras for 2024. We have to get very comfortable with the discomfort of how he's going to behave. We have to get very comfortable with it and know that we're going to be really uncomfortable this year, and we're going to have to continue doing the work anyhow. So, I think that we've all got to keep an eye on that. All right. The other thing that is happening this week that folks should be very aware of is that we are moving into a very rapid briefing schedule in the Supreme Court case involving the Colorado ballot initiative. I have to remind you all, oral argument in that matter in front of the Supreme Court is a month from today. A month from today. Okay? The briefing schedule is very, very, very tight. And we're going to have a really good idea here. Once we've got the initial opening briefs filed, we know what the Colorado Secretary of State is going to say here. We know how this is going to go, but it's going to be a very intense window of time of litigation here. And also, just in the same way that there were amicus briefs filed in the DC Circuit on the issue of presidential immunity, you can expect that other organizations, groups of people, individuals are in the process of writing their amicus briefs before the Supreme Court. Now, we're going to see prominent legal commentators come out and argue in amicus briefs that the plain wording of the Constitution means that he can't be on the ballot. And again, I think this is a no-brainer. I know that when this issue was first raised, I was like, I don't know. Somebody might go, a court could go in a political direction and decide not to rule on this. Now that we are where we are in Colorado, we are where we are in Maine, and we have pending ballot issues in I think it's 17 other states now. I think that the plain language of the Constitution stands a solid chance here. And, I'm gaming this one at 7-2. I've said this publicly. I'm just going to tell you, Alito and Thomas are a lost cause. But I would not be surprised to see the originalists and constructionists on the Supreme Court vote in favor of the 14th Amendment interpretation that was applied by the Colorado Supreme Court. Now, that one's a little bit more sketch than the presidential immunity case. It's not as slam dunk of a case, but it should be obvious. So we're going to see a lot more development there, and, we'll see. What? I heard some nonsense that SCOTUS will let him stay on the ballot, but will not allow him to serve if elected. No, the Supreme Court doesn't have the authority to do that. All they do is hear ripe legal matters. They don't have the authority to be like, boom, you can run, but you can't serve. No chance that that's going to happen. All right. So that we're going to see those briefs and those amicus efforts start to develop over the next week or two. All right. The Iowa caucuses are a week from today. Again, a week from today is also Martin Luther King Day, and the Iowa Republican Party purposefully moved their caucus to January 15th. to fall on Martin Luther King Day, among other reasons. And so one of the things that you can also expect to have happening here is that there's going to be barnstorming across Iowa all week, crazy statements from Trump, wild statements from Nikki Haley. DeSantis is going to do all of his stuff to try to seem like he's a rational, ordinary human being. I wish him luck on that. But just know that, again, there's going to be an awful lot of opportunities for Trump to be acting out this week because of the Iowa caucuses. Do not be surprised if the statements that he is making on the stump are statements that are like wildly out of left field. Okay. I'll also just reiterate, there were statements made over the weekend and at the end of last week that literally made no logical sense. Like the decompensation is truly happening in real time. So don't be surprised by any of that either. I really do want people to be very, very focused on your own work for 2024. Okay. And if you are having a moment where you are feeling like, I don't know how to respond to this, I am triggered, I am angry, I'm upset, I'm scared, this is outrageous, why isn't he in prison yet? Why hasn't somebody shut him up? I want to tell you that the way out of that is to really commit to your own activism and mobilization work. I'm going to remind you all one more time, you got 2 days left to get in on this course that we start on Thursday, this Thursday, with messaging strategy and disinformation response. Okay. So if you want in, last and final chance, closes Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific, GaiaLeadershipProject.com/mobilize. You should join us. Your classmates are amazing. I can tell you that already. Like, please get in on that. All right. But we are going to see a lot of we're just going to see a lot of fascism this week. I just want everybody to be really prepared. There's going to be an enormous amount of like fascist signaling this week on the campaign trail in Iowa, and not just from Trump, but Trump is going to be like at the very top of it. So there's quite a lot going on here. All right. In that regard. Now, there is some breaking news out of Nevada this morning, which is very significant, to the effect that apparently Trump is not going to be on the primary ballot in Nevada. This is being reported by Axios this morning because his team did not fill out the paperwork. His team did not fill out the paperwork. This is my moment where I have to remind you all that it's not just the fascism, it's also the incompetence. And the fact that he's not going to be on the primary ballot in Nevada, assuming that this can't be rectified between now and the Nevada primary, we're going to see, a very interesting set of developments in terms of what's going to happen in the general. So I want everybody to keep an eye on this one, all right, because it has been confirmed now by mainstream media. I know this started with a post that apparently began on Twitter and elsewhere, but apparently it's been confirmed by mainstream media this morning that he's not going to be on the primary ballot in Nevada because he blew the deadline and didn't fill out the forms. So I don't know. I think that there is a little bit of a kind of like downhill escalation right now in terms of the various ballot statuses for Trump as we head into primary season and into the general. So I do really want people to understand that while, of course, there's always an opportunity to write people in, the other thing to think about here is that writing someone in on a ballot takes a certain degree of will. And it also means that you've got to understand what it takes when you show up at your polling place to accomplish that. Yes, there are election workers that can walk you through it. We all know that if your name is scrubbed from the rolls, there are ways that you can fill out an affidavit and vote on the same day anyhow in many jurisdictions. But I want people to be aware, okay, that if he's not on a printed ballot, it's going to make him much harder to be elected in that particular jurisdiction. So it's, if you need something to hang your hat on this morning, just know that, we're now looking at like 3 states where he's not going to be on the ballot for the primary, apparently, unless something changes. And the general is up for grabs. So, there's quite a number of things that are in play here at the moment. And I don't know, man. I'm very curious to see how this is all going to play out personally. I'm not going to enjoy my schadenfreude just yet, but I think that they are hamstrung right now. And we'll see what that means by the time we get to July in the Republican National Convention. Okay. There is another trial starting in New York State today that I want everybody to be aware of. And that is a trial that is about claims by Letitia James, icon that she is, against the National Rifle Association. One of the things that this case alleges is that the NRA has engaged in massive financial fraud and election violations. Wayne LaPierre resigned late last week. You all may remember there was a lot of coverage of this on Friday. And that's not surprising either. You will all remember that there were these strange set of circumstances a couple of years ago, leaving aside all the Maria Butina stuff, which has now kind of like come up again. You all remember Maria Butina, the honeypot who was inside the NRA, whose boyfriend went to prison for funneling Russian money into government campaigns. There was a situation several years ago involving Oliver North, where Oliver North had been on the board of directors of the NRA and he resigned because of alleged financial fraud inside the NRA. And there were a whole series of allegations at the time about how Wayne LaPierre had used NRA money to take private jet flights and had used NRA money for his own personal use and had used NRA money to buy homes and all sorts of other things that went along with this, right? And at the time, that was really the beginning of the kind of decimation of the NRA. Again, I got to give all credit to where it's due. David Hogg, Fred Gutenberg, the Parkland families were a huge part of raising awareness about all of this as it has happened. But I do want people to be aware that Letitia James' suit, again, very similar to what she initiated against the Trump organization, has the potential to end the NRA. And I think one of the things that we're going to be paying very close attention to here is how this trial plays out. There is no question that Wayne LaPierre's resignation is directly related to this trial, in part because if he is still involved in the NRA, with all of the allegations that have been made against him, it's going to be much harder for the NRA's lawyers to argue that there wasn't and isn't ongoing financial issues inside the NRA. So we got a ways to go here. Let's say goodbye to you. Bye, troll. See you later. One of the things that I just want people to be aware of here is that this particular trial also has very big national significance. So don't forget about this, because one of the things that we know is that dark money was routinely funneled through the NRA to Republican candidates. And this issue of like, what's your NRA rating is something that has been brought up over and over again in various campaigns. So a couple of the things that I just want people to just consider here is that while we are waiting for the prospect of Biden being reelected, keeping the Senate, taking back the House, and the potential legislation of the overturning of Citizens United, the more that we can decimate the dark money funnels that result in illegal foreign money, influence money flowing into Republican campaigns, the easier it's going to be for us to win. All right. So all of these things are linked together. Shout out to Tish James for continuing to be just like an extraordinary public servant. And I want you all to keep an eye on that one because it's going to be big. All right. In case you hadn't noticed, we're in for it this week. I've said it over and over again. Please like this broadcast. Please subscribe here. I'm going to be here every day this week talking about all this stuff as it develops. And I hope that you will share this broadcast. We are free in public 5 days a week here now. If you like what you see here, please choose to support this broadcast financially, just in the same way that you subscribe to NPR. I strongly encourage you to become a subscriber over at patreon.com/resistancelive, where for $2 a month, you can ask me questions before every broadcast, and you can get it on Sunday Progressive Coffee Hour, and our subscriptions go up from there. But, this is a very small investment, less than a dime a broadcast, to help to support this work financially and to support our team behind the scenes. Very grateful to all of you. I'm very thankful for all of you. I want to thank everybody who's shouted out to me on Threads about the visit from my dad. They're still here. We've had a wonderful time. I'm very lucky to come from a very progressive Democratic family where we get to sit around the table and talk about all this stuff. And I am excited to see all of you in Mobilize 2024. Reminder for the last time today, you only have 2 days left to get in. GaiaLeadershipProject.com/mobilize. We have the political director of the DNC as a guest. We've got Malcolm Kenyatta, former U.S. Senate candidate, current Auditor General for Pennsylvania candidate in this one. We've got tons of great Gen Z organizers and organizers from around the country. So please don't miss it. All right. I will catch you all here live tomorrow. Thank you so much for being here. Very grateful for all of you and have a great Monday. All right. Bye.